420 this past week, so we talked the legalization of marijuana across the state, the Maricopa County attorney, and an activist from the governor's office who think it's a horrible idea. Welcome to the Mike Broomhead Show.
Well, I got a message, I got a song. Can I get a witness? Tell me what's going on. I show the people I've been away.
All right, so we're going to talk about marijuana. In the state of Arizona, they have a bill that is going, well, actually, it's a proposition that will be on the November ballot, similar to what's in Colorado. Is it a good idea? A great interview coming up on the show. But we start every week off with a headline roundup. We call it the sweep. Let's start with the elections. The New York primaries ended, and the polls were absolutely correct. Donald Trump, with a huge win, takes 89 delegates in the state. And now we got four of those delegates were picked up by John Kasich. Ted Cruz, big goose egg, just like was expected, did not do well in the state of New York. So Hillary Clinton, she has a big win in New York. Bernie Sanders pauses his campaign for a day to re-energize himself. Well, the guy, what was he, 90? So he needed a rest. So he takes his day off, but he hits the campaign trail hard once again. So I want you to take a look at the differences here with Donald Trump. Donald Trump when he loses and what he says, and Donald Trump what he says when he wins in the process. First of all, this is what Donald Trump looks like when he loses a state.
Our Republican system is absolutely rigged. It's a phony deal. Now, what do I know? I started running like 9 months ago. Who would have thought I would have been in first place? What do I know? Right? What do I know? But I'm in first place by a lot. Millions and millions of votes. That doesn't count. You notice? Nobody even talks about votes. I have millions of votes more, but I also have hundreds of delegates more. But that's not the same thing to me. I think the vote is the thing that you count.
Okay, so there he is, and I don't disagree with him, and many people don't either. No one's ever paid this close attention to the process because it's always been over this deep into the process. People are beginning now to see how the delegate works in each state, where they have caucuses, and how it's all not rigged, but how it's set differently than just a popular vote election. But now, after the big win in New York, this is how Donald Trump talked about the win and the votes in New York.
One of the reasons that New York gave me such an incredible vote, a vote far beyond what the polls said, and I wasn't surprised. When you look, the vote was incredible. It was record-setting.
All right, so let's talk about the Democrats for a moment. Hillary Clinton gets 139 delegates and a big win over Bernie Sanders, and this is what Hillary had to say after her victory in New York.
Today, you proved once again there's no place like home.
She was right movie but the wrong line. I thought her line in that movie was, "I'll get you, my pretty." Anyway, Hillary Clinton wins 139 delegates in her home state. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, now this is not Arizona he's talking about. He's talking about New York. Listen to this.
I must say that I am really concerned about the conduct of the voting process in New York State. And I hope that that process will change in the future.
Now they're talking about how it was handled and horrible behavior, just like they're suing the state of Arizona. You know that Hillary and Bernie and a former Democrat representative going to run for Senate, Ann Kirkpatrick, are all suing the state of Arizona, and now Bernie's upset about how it happened in New York. Moving on to President Obama and the Supreme Court hearing arguments about the expansion of his executive powers. He's using the executive orders, what he did with DACA, the Deferred Action Program for what's called the Dreamers, and giving them status and the ability to work, and it all had to be put on hold because lower courts have said that he may have exceeded his power of his office by changing these laws that ultimately the Supreme Court needs to decide. What's important here is that the lower court has ruled that they've got to halt this. So even though there's only 8 justices on the Supreme Court, and it could end in a 4-4 tie until a 9th justice is placed on that court, what would happen is if they ended in a tie, we may not hear this until June, of how they decide. If it ends in a 4-4 tie, it goes back to the lower court ruling, and the president must stop with the program. It's a much bigger issue within our country than just immigration. This is about the expansion of executive powers. This is why civics education is so important. The separation of powers in the three branches of government. And if you are allowing the president to change laws in this manner, what you've done is made the Congress either a dissenting voice or just a rubber stamp, because they really have no power to stop anything. All laws are supposed to originate in the Congress, and they go to the president's desk for signature. If he can change any law he wants to without the Congress, what's the point of the Congress? And it relegates them to having less power than they should. That's not the way the separation of powers was designed. We'll see what the Supreme Court has to say on that issue. Mayor Greg Stanton in the city of Phoenix talked about in his State of the City address that he is in favor of allocating tax dollars that are already in, not raising taxes, to build a new facility in downtown Phoenix to house the Phoenix Suns and the Arizona Coyotes. The reason why this is a big story is that people that are not in favor of taxpayer dollars going to fund sports facilities are going to be up in arms about this, whether taxes are raised or not. I don't have any problem with taxpayer-funded facilities. Just look at what University of Phoenix Stadium has done for the state of Arizona and the revenue in its Super Bowl, national championships, Final Four next year. Even WrestleMania was in that building once, which was huge for the economy of Arizona. So we'll see how it plays out. And even if the Coyotes and the Suns are interested in a building together, that's all going to play itself out. But that's what the mayor of Phoenix had to say. The freeway shooter, Leslie Merritt Jr., has been released from jail and his bond reduced to zero. They are now questioning the evidence that the state has against him. That's why it's been reduced from $1 million to zero. Doesn't say he's not guilty, and it didn't dismiss the charges, but they don't believe the state has enough evidence to keep him in jail. He's been there for 8 months until his trial happens. So we'll see what happens in the coming days as he wears an ankle bracelet to keep him at home. Lastly, Harriet Tubman is going to replace Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill. So that is just a little piece of American history moving in one direction or the other, and we'll see how the public likes those. In just a moment, Bill Montgomery, county attorney for Maricopa County, and Debbie Moak, who is an activist that works inside the governor's office, speak to us about the bill that would legalize marijuana in the state of Arizona. It really is more to the story than just making it legal or freedom of choice. All that coming up in just a moment. Stick around.
The Mike Broomhead Show is brought to you in part by Cliff Castle Casino Hotel and Sanderson Ford.
All right, but the topic is the legalization of marijuana. We're actually filming the interview on 420, which you know is Marijuana Day nationally. And there's another side to the issue of whether or not it should be decriminalized in Arizona. So joining me, Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery.
Hey, Mike.
And Debbie Moak, both of you against this legislation. And so let's talk about why it's the wrong thing for Arizona.
Well, sure. Well, from the initiative language itself, it creates a unique environment that I would say is crony capitalism at the ballot box. It provides current dispensary owners the right to get first issue of licenses to open up recreational stores. They get licenses to cultivate an unlimited amount of marijuana. And on top of it, any efforts from cities or towns going forward to regulate those businesses, these dispensary owners are automatically grandfathered in, and nothing can be done to restrict those businesses. From the policy impact too, and the community impact, increasing availability of an increasingly psychoactive laced drug is not a good idea for Arizona. We have enough problems right now we're trying to deal with. We have enough issues related to alcohol abuse and tobacco use. Adding one more substance makes no sense.
So from the legal side of this as well, it's still a Class 1 drug with the federal government. And if this administration is going to end in January and we're going to have a new president, if a new president comes in that says we're going to now begin enforcing federal law again, what happens in Colorado? And if we pass it, what happens here?
Well, you're right, because currently marijuana is a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substances Act. So everyone who is currently engaged in possession, distribution, sale, cultivation is in violation of federal law. And all it would take is for a president to come in who actually wants to uphold their oath of office to tell federal law enforcement officials, go seize the contraband, go seize property, go seize bank accounts. and all of those profits go away.
So why, I'm asking you to speculate on what this legislation is about. Why come at a state level? Why not try to change it federally?
Well, the Marijuana Policy Project and other George Soros funded organizations have given up trying to affect policy at the federal level, and instead for the last 20 years have been working in one state after another, first selling us the promise of medicinal use of marijuana, and now coming back and trying to push outright legalization.
So let me ask you about the message, because we talk to our kids about just say no is my generation, just say no to drugs. And we talk about kids not drinking alcohol before they're 21. Matt is very active during prom and homecoming. So what's the mixed message here of this saying let's legalize it for adults? What does it say to kids that are talking about experimenting in high school?
So we can look to Colorado to see what can happen to Arizona. Colorado youth now have the highest marijuana use rates in the nation. Certainly not something I want to see here for Arizona's youth. We have first use of marijuana in Arizona is 13 years, 7 months.
Wow.
And then further look at the data, knowing that at those ages, 1 in 6 of those youth users will go on to have an addiction. It's not something that I want to see happen to our youth and our families. Certainly, it's not something that Arizona can afford.
Well, something you touched on that we hear a lot is that it's not nearly as addictive as alcohol. That alcohol, we see a lot more problems with people that are heavy drinkers as opposed to people that use marijuana. Is any of that information accurate?
Absolutely not. So let's start with previous THC content, which most of today's data, the loose data that we have, are based on THC content, the psychoactive ingredient, of about 3%, when in fact we know that the average content today is more like 32% in Colorado, and then add on edibles and drinkables, and we're talking about yet an entirely different substance.
What's interesting is we were talking before we started about the laws and how you can have a medical marijuana card in Arizona, but you can't possess medical marijuana on a college campus if they're federally funded. There are still these mixtures of the federal restrictions with the local laws, and how does that play out from your office perspective? It's got to be a nightmare with enforcement, right?
Well, what it means is that the Medical Marijuana Act carved out a very narrow set of exemptions from state prosecution. And so where someone is squarely within those permissions, we don't have jurisdiction to prosecute, but outside of it we do, and we're continuing to handle those cases. The confusion comes when someone purports to have a lawful authority to possess or to use in a particular area, and you have an overlay of federal law, or they're not doing it the way that Arizona law specifically permits, which then grants law enforcement jurisdiction. So you're right, and regardless of all of that, you still have the federal law that right now, for policy reasons, is not being enforced.
The devil is always in the details in the legislation, and we talked earlier on the radio show about this. And so what I want to do is take a break now and come back, because there are some specifics in this that actually creates a department of the government that has authority, and then it kind of takes away some of the power from local law enforcement to be able to deal with these things. So it's going to be sold. We know that there's going to be a lot of money spent trying to make this seem as if it's the freedom that a person has and it's good for Arizona and the tax dollars for Arizona. But I want to talk about some of those details in the legislation. So we take a quick break. When we get back, we'll get into the details of what this will actually do if it is passed in Arizona. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why, if you are on the fence, why maybe voting no is the right thing here in Arizona. So we'll be back in a moment. All right, we are back. We're talking about whether or not it's right for Arizona to decriminalize. We cannot legalize marijuana, but we can decriminalize it here in the state of Arizona like Colorado did, and that's basically what is in the legislature. And one of the things we touched on was the THC levels, and that's like in alcoholic drinks, we have alcohol content or proof in liquor. How is that regulated, or is it regulated?
Well, it isn't regulated. And again, remembering that from the 70s and 80s, we had 3% THC, and today we can turbocharge our pot to 80, 85, and beyond through substances called butane hash oil. As well, think about this, a drinkable or edible, typically to produce a high, you need 10 milligrams of THC. Well, one edible, one gummy bear in particular has 100 milligrams of THC. Not only that, when a youth, which those are targeted to youth, eats a gummy bear, instead of eating one little ear, they'll eat the whole thing and more. Those highs don't kick in for a couple of hours, unlike smoking a substance. So now we see such high overdose toxic levels, psychoactive experiences from our youth.
So let me ask you, let me give you an analogy and see if it fits. So you go to a doctor and they give you a prescription for any of the other kind of an opiate or something. You get a Vicodin or something like that, and they have it in milligrams in a pill. So you know how many milligrams of that drug are in a pill. They don't give you a brick of the stuff and say only take off this much of it.
Well,
and that's what they're doing with pot, is they're going to sell you something in a big piece, like a gummy bear, and say only eat a little piece of it, and no one's going to do that.
Without any instructions,
Right.
without a doctor talking to you about, well, you have this particular condition, so this amount and this frequency is what's really going to help you. We don't have any of the science to support that. You know, and Debbie mentioned the psychoactive effect. There are 4 deaths that have been documented to date in Denver as a consequence of people eating edibles. So marijuana has killed, and it will kill more.
So on the legal part of this, because the more I learn about this legislation, it creates kind of a nightmare for what you do in law enforcement, because does it really create pot cops? I mean, is that a way of calling them, pot cops?
Yeah, well, so through this effort to legalize marijuana, and you're right, we could try to legalize it at the state level, but it doesn't make it legal at the federal level. There are several parts of that initiative that cause problems, serious problems. One aspect of it is that it prohibits punishment unless someone is negligent or commits malpractice, which automatically then, for law enforcement trying to deal with marijuana impaired drivers, means we can't have a per se limit like we do with alcohol. The second part of that, when it comes to our libertarian friends who like small government, this creates a whole new department of marijuana. It creates a commission. It loads that commission with dispensary owners. And then it also restricts enforcement of laws underneath that particular set of statutes to just the Department of Marijuana, which our Department of Liquor has also, but it goes further. It then says that this Department of Marijuana also has authority to enforce rules and regulations, even for people who aren't licensed under it, if marijuana is transferred for anything of value. So through this initiative now, they're giving sole enforcement authority to the Department of Marijuana, which then means where does local law enforcement then assert jurisdiction? So we're going to have thousands of pot cops then in order to police the state from unlawful transfers of marijuana. And the last part of this that should really bother the business community is there are no exemptions for people to be able to follow federal requirements for having a drug-free workplace. And they will have to admit that their employee was negligent or their employee engaged in malpractice before they can take any disciplinary action.
So in the city of Phoenix in Maricopa County, they're trying to change the rules to move the medical marijuana dispensaries to more industrial areas, because they're afraid if this passes that those businesses will become recreational use or pot shops, and they don't want them near places of worship or schools, and so they're trying to head that off. Are we going to see this all over? Are other cities doing this because they're afraid that these medical marijuana facilities are all of a sudden going to become recreational use pot shops?
Well, and they will under the initiative. They actually have a right to have first issue of licenses to be able to transition from being a dispensary to being a recreational use facility. And once that initiative passes as well, should it, and I don't think it will, but if it did, then no city could retroactively then affect zoning. So if there are other cities or towns that are as concerned as Phoenix apparently is, then you may see more doing that. Because once this passes, those dispensaries then have a right to become a recreational use facility, and cities and towns can't do anything to restrict it.
At first look, a lot of people will say it's what if a person wants to smoke pot, who cares? But originally, you were on the wrong side of this issue according to poll numbers. But now it's 49% of voters in Arizona say they vote no right now. 43 are in favor, but there's that 8% of people that are still undecided. What do you say to those people that are still on the fence?
So I want them to remember, we hear an awful lot, and people do get focused on heroin users, meth users, cocaine, and other substances. But what they're forgetting is that, again, the average age of first use for marijuana in Arizona is 13 years, 7 months. So, and by the way, Mike, I have worked with those youth. I've employed them through a nonprofit for 16 years. Over 16 years, I've yet to meet one, not even one young man or woman who didn't first use marijuana. And this freedom, let me tell you about that. My job now in the governor's office is on a weekly basis to go to treatment centers, halfway houses, sober living, homeless shelters, domestic violence shelters. The number one thing connected to all of this is substance use. More substances available mean more use. And all we have to do is look to other states like Colorado to know that we will increase the access and the use here in Arizona. It's not good for Arizona.
The issue not going away, and it's something you need to be educated on. You'll have the information to find out the perspective here, and I thank both of you for yours on this because I think it's a much deeper issue. So thanks for stopping by. We'll be back. We do it every week, something that's very good in Arizona, something that makes us smile. We call it Broomhead's Best. Who would have ever thought that we'd be talking about Arizona's high schools leading the country? The Washington Post had the headline that Texas and Arizona lead the country in education. 3 of the top 10 best high schools in the country. The Basic School Scottsdale, number 2 in the nation. Tucson Basic School, 3 in the country, and Oro Valley Basic School, number 6 on the list. Now that is great news for the state of Arizona and a step in the right direction. Let's get the rest of our public schools to follow that model, and we can be talking good news in Arizona education for a long time to come. Now what's burning up the internet? We call it #this.
I only wanted one time to see you laughing, babe. Only wanna see you laughing, yeah. In the purple rain, purple rain, purple rain.
Sad news in the entertainment world, especially if you're in my generation. The artist known as Prince has passed away at the age of 57 years old. Shocking news for someone. Now, I remember where I was when Michael Jackson died, when I was a little boy, when Elvis died. There's just certain iconic entertainers that when something happens, when they pass away, we remember it. Robin Williams, if you're a fan of comedy. But Prince was something for my generation that kind of changed music. He was so unique. Movies, Purple Rain. He also brought along other superstars as well. So sad news in the entertainment world. The artist Prince has passed away at the age of 57 at his home in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So that this week is burning up the internet, and we're calling it #this. All right, we got a few minutes left. I'm going to tell you about a great event and something that's helping veterans right here in Arizona. We'll do that in a moment. Stick around.
The Mike Broomhead Show is brought to you in part by Cliff Castle Casino Hotel and Sanderson Ford.
Always want to tell you about really good organizations, especially if they're helping veterans here in the state of Arizona. There's an organization called Horse Rhythm. Go to horserhythm.org. You can check out what they're doing using equine therapy to help veterans and first responders, PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, and having fantastic results. A gala this weekend calling We Believe. I was really thrilled to be the master of ceremonies. Look up this organization if you're a veteran or know someone who could use their services, or if you want to support a really good organization, look up Horse Rhythm. You're going to be amazed. It's veterans reaching out and helping other veterans. It is fantastic, and I'm really thrilled that they're here in the state of Arizona. So I wanted to make sure I remind you that before we ended this show. We'll be back next Saturday. God bless everyone.
Get more of Mike Broomhead on Facebook, Twitter, and of course weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on News Talk 550 KFYI.